guys, welcome back to Medical Coding with Blue. Today is Christmas in July, day 17. If you are brand new to my channel, welcome. I am Blue, I'm a medical coder. This Christmas in July season, I am bringing you stories from myself and stories from my early days as a medical coder. So I hope you all enjoy the series and let us begin. All right, today's topic is my worst first dates. So here we go. Okay, so I will start off by saying this. I do not have a lot of experience with dating. That's number one. I dated only one man before I met my husband, dated him, and married him, right? And I started dating at 19. So I never dated in high school. I never got into the whole boys scene and everything like that because I was so busy studying when I was in school. That was where my focus was at, right? And we all have our life plan at that time, right? When we're in our teens. And I got dealt a different hand, and I was okay with that because I feel like my experiences made me who I am today, and I am good with that, right? So I met and married my husband, and we had been married for 10 years, and we got divorced, and that's just something that happens, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I was completely healed from everything that had happened in my marriage. I wasn't going to carry over anything into my new relationship. I was just going to just be there and be present in whatever relationship that I was in. So I was like, okay. So I didn't date for the longest time after my divorce. And then my friend Michelle was like, you know, Blue, you really need to start dating because I want us to go out as a couple, like couples, because she was married, right? And she wanted to do couples things, right? In which they would take me out, right? But it was like her husband and two women, you know? So, but she's like, I really want to do like couples things with you. And she said, we need to find you a man. So I was like, okay. So we get on like these dating apps and stuff, or websites, right? At the time, they were dating websites. And so we took nice new pictures of me, and because I wanted to make sure that all the pictures were recent, and we got together, we wrote the profile, and then there we go, right? So I was like, okay. And she's like, well, she goes, don't be too picky, Blue. And I was like, what do you mean too picky? And then she goes, no. She goes, I know you. She goes, I know you want a really good man, but she goes, men are going to be the way that they are. And she goes, so you can't like just dismiss them for any little thing. I was like, I'm not going to do that. And I said, I was married once too, you know. And she goes, well, she goes, I just want you to give these guys a chance. So I said, okay. So as we're going through these messages that I was getting, because as soon as you sign up for a dating website, of course you get tons of messages because you're new, right? And so we're going through these messages, and I'm like, nope. And she's like, Blue, she's like, you're doing too pickiness again. And I was like, look, and I was like, I'm an energies person. I read energy. That's what I do. And I said, I am not getting good energy from these guys. And then so she says, just give them a try. And so I was like, all right, you know, whatever. So I started talking with this one guy, right? Smart guy. I mean, he's about my age, right? And so I'm like, okay, you know, this guy seems pretty cool, right? And so we had made arrangements to have a date, right? And he was like, he had been out of town, right? I think he was like in Houston or something. And he had just come back, and he had come back that day because we had been text messaging like during the day and stuff. And I had gone to the mall to go get my hair cut, right? And so I'm at the mall, and I get a message from him, and he's like, hey, I know we have a date coming up. He's like, but I really want to meet you. He's like, you think we can just meet up at the mall and just hang out today? And I was like, okay. You know, it's like, but I'm getting my hair cut. And he goes, well, we can meet at the, and as like I'm touching my hair as I'm thinking of that. But he says, well, we can meet at the food court. So I was like, okay, you know, we can just meet and chit chat, have a drink or whatever, like soda or whatever. Okay, cool, you know. And so I get done with the salon, right? And he's like, well, I'll meet you there at the food court. So I was like, okay. So it's about half an hour later, right? And so he's there, right? Or I'm looking around, and I don't see what I think is him at first, right? And so I'm looking around, and I don't see anybody that looks like him, because in his picture, he was very nicely dressed. He had a button-down shirt and like slacks, and then he was wearing another one where he's like in polo and Dockers and things like that. So, I mean, this guy looked like he was very well dressed and well kept, right? And so I'm looking around and I don't see anybody that looks like that, right? And so then all of a sudden I see somebody stand up and start waving. And I'm like, this guy can't be waving at me. And so then he's like waving, he's walking towards me now, and I'm thinking, oh no. And I'm like, no. And I remember turning around, like looking to see if there was anybody behind me. No, he was coming for me. And he's like, hi. And he's like, are you Blue? And I'm like, yeah. And then he's like, hi. And I was like, oh, really? So I'm looking at this guy, right? And I know you're not supposed to judge or anything like that, but really, we're meeting each other. He's saying that he wants a relationship and that kind of thing. He's looking for a relationship. And he shows up to meet me in basketball shorts and a white t-shirt that had holes in it because like it had too much bleach, you know, and like sandals with toes that were not clipped, like not, the toenails was like really long. Okay, really? And so he shakes my hand and stuff like that. I'm like, nice to meet you. And I'm thinking, and I can hear my friend Michelle's voice in my head, don't be too picky, Blue. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he just came over, just in what he was wearing. And I'm thinking to myself, he couldn't throw on a pair of cargo shorts or something. I mean, look decent. Like you're not going to go to a pickup game. You're going out to meet somebody that you want to be in a relationship potentially with. Okay. And so I'm like, and so I can still hear my friend Michelle, don't be too picky, Blue. And so I started talking to him because the guy is a great conversationalist. That is one thing about him that I will give him, is that he was a great conversationalist. We had wonderful chats, you know, and so that was a part of him that I liked, right? And so as he's like, well, let's just walk around. We didn't sit and talk or anything like that, but he's like, let's just walk around. And I was like, okay. So as we're walking around, I'm noticing that he complains a lot. I mean, like there was like a lot of times where he's saying something and he's just kind of like complaining. And so I'm like, not only did this guy show up not dressed appropriately, but he's complaining a lot. So I'm like, okay, you know, just trying to listen, and I'm like, I'm going to be a good friend here at this moment. And I'm thinking in my head, Michelle, right? And so as we're walking in the mall, there was this guy who was in the jewelry store, and he jumps out in front of us and he says, hi. He goes, sir, would you and your girlfriend like to come in and check out the sale that we're having? I said, no, we're not together. And then he said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, your wife? No, we're not together. And so he said, oh, okay. He said, well, we're having a good sale, and you know, if you're interested, just come on in. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. And so we kept walking. He goes, that was mean. And I go, I don't want to put you in a situation, right? I said, we're just meeting. And then he's like, yeah, but he thought we were together. And I was like, thinking to myself, I'm coming out of work, so I'm dressed nicely and you dress like that. Okay. So this was about Halloween time too, because the Halloween store was there. And so he's like, hey, let's go in here. Let's go check out the costumes. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to find a way to get out of here because this guy is getting on my last nerve, right? And so I'm like, I'm not going to deal with this too much longer. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I can just kind of scoot my way out of here if he gets distracted enough with this costumes and stuff. And so we go in the costume store, and he's like pointing out every inappropriate costume. And he's like, this will look great on you. This will look great on you. You should get this one. And I'm like, yeah. I said, you know what? I said, this has been an experience. I said, but I said, I do have to leave now. I said, because I have a meeting early in the morning and I have to be at work at 6. So I said, it was an experience meeting you. And I said, thank you so much. And I said, but I got to get out of here. And he's like, oh, really? Are you sure you got to? I said, yes. I said, I'm really sorry. I said, it's getting late now. And I said, and I need to go. And I said, but I'll catch you later, okay? And he's like, okay. And so I take off, right? And I'm booking it out of the mall because like I am done at this point. I am done with this guy. I am done with listening to his stories and all this and just complaints. And I'm like, no, I'm done. And so as soon as I leave out of there, I get a message on my cell phone, right? I'm like driving away. And he writes me, he's like, oh, he goes, it was so nice to meet you, Blue. He goes, you're so beautiful. And he goes, I just want to thank you because he said, I showed up the way that I did because I wanted to see how you would treat me. He said, and you were so nice to me. He goes, so I can't wait to see you again. oh, so you played a game with me, you know? And so I wrote him back and I said, I have enjoyed our conversations so much. And I said, and I was really looking forward to meeting you. And I said, but I feel like you doing something like that is like playing a game. And I'm not somebody that wants to play games. I don't do head games. I'm very straightforward. And I said, so again, it was an experience to meet you, but I don't think we're a good fit. And so I blocked him after that because I was not going to sit here and argue back and forth with him. You know, like, really, dude, like, you know, we're like in our early 30s. So like, come on, man, you know, like that's too, you're too old to be playing games like that. That's for like teenagers, right? That they do stuff like that, you know, but not for somebody in their 30s. Okay. And so I called Michelle and I told her the whole debacle, right? And she was like, oh my gosh, Blue. And I'm like, yeah. And I said, so I tried, but no. And she goes, okay, well, one down, we're just going to keep going. So I said, okay. So this other guy, later on, he messages me, and he is a helicopter pilot. So I'm like, okay, you know, this guy's got it together, you know, and he's 45, and I'm like, okay, a little older, but that's okay, because I like older men. I'm good with older men. I actually prefer older men because for me, older men are more settled, right? Or so I think. I got a couple more. So anyway, so this guy is 45, divorced twice. Okay, I'm not gonna judge you because I've been divorced, right? And so I'm not gonna judge anybody, right? And so he's like, you know, hey, and so we're chatting back and forth, and you know, everything's going good. I'm like, this guy is really smart, and you know, he's got a degree, and you know, this seems like it's a really good match, you know. So we had arranged to have a date at the Olive Garden. So I was like, okay, cool. You know, we were going to see each other like a Saturday or something. And it was a Thursday night. I remember it was Thursday because I came home and watched something that was on a Thursday night. That's how I know what day it was. So anyway, I get a message from him earlier in the day, and he's like, hey, he's like, I know we have a date for Saturday. He's like, but I really want to meet you today. He's like, I want to go and I want to have soup and salad like at Jason's Deli. Jason's Deli, if you don't know, is like a soup and salad place, you know. He's like, he goes, I would really like some company. Would you like to come with me? And so I'm like, okay, you know, I don't have anything planned in the evening anyway. So I'm like, okay, other than my show that's going to come on. But I didn't tell him this, you know. I was like, okay, well, it's just a date anyway. So I was like, okay. So I put on a cute dress and I'm off and running, right? So I get there and he said, well, I'll meet you outside Jason's Deli. So I was like, okay. And so I pull up to Jason's Deli and I see this man outside hanging out. And I'm like, that's not my date, because that looks like an older man, like way older than the guy that I'm looking for in this picture, right? And this guy in this picture is supposed to be 45, right? And so I'm like, I'm sitting there and I'm waiting and I'm like, well, maybe he meant inside, right? And I see this guy, this older guy, still walking back and forth outside. And I'm like, that's kind of odd, right? And I'm like, but he's about his height, you know? And I'm like, And I'm like, no, that's not him, because that guy looks too old. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe he's inside. Maybe he's, because it's getting closer about time. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe he's just inside. So I get out and I start walking up to the restaurant, right? And then this guy starts walking towards me. He's like, hey, are you Blue? And I'm like, oh no. And I'm like, not again. And so I'm looking at him. He's dressed decently, okay, at least, right? But he doesn't look anything like the picture. And he's like, are you Blue? And I'm like, yes, that's me. And then he goes, hi. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I said, you don't look, I said, you weren't what I expected. And then so he's like, well, it's nice to meet you. So he goes to give me a hug, and I immediately do like the church hug, right? because this guy is just like like I get a weird vibe, right? As soon as I started seeing him, I'm like, I'm getting a weird vibe, you know? So I give him a church hug, and he's like, well, it's so nice to meet you. And so he gives me a little squeeze, and I'm like, okay, you know? So we get into the restaurant, right? And he's like, oh, I love this place. It's so good. And I was like, yeah, you know, I like it too, because I like Jason's Deli. You know, we always order from them all the time at the office, you know. So I was like, okay. And so he runs in front of me to the register, right? And so I go up behind him, you know, and or I'm like right beside him, and we're talking and stuff. And so he puts in his order, right? And then he pulls out his card as soon as he's done ordering his food. And so I'm like, And so the guy at the register, he looked kind of confused because he saw us coming in together, and like we were talking to each other. And so the guy was like kind of waiting for him to like ask me what I wanted, right? And so I was like, okay, you know, all right, here we go, you know. So the guy, the register guy took the card, and he kind of gave me this look like, sorry, you know. And so he ran his card. It's all right. I have my own money, you know. I have my own money, I have my own card, you know. I was like, okay, because I'm always prepared, right? And so I go, and he gets his cup, goes gets his drink, doesn't wait for me, right? And so I was like, okay, so I put in my own order, and so I pay for myself, and you know, I go and I look where he's at, and I go sit over there. And so as I sit down, and he's like, oh, he goes, I just can't wait. He goes, I've been thinking about this stuff all day, and he's like, it's just so good here. And I'm like, okay, all right, you know. And so I was like, all right, you know, well, maybe it's because, you know, he's been on so many dates, and, you know, it's just expensive. And it is expensive going out, right? And I'm like, okay, you know, it's like, whatever. So I'm just like, get into the experience, Blue, just relax. And I'm like, because he could be a really nice guy, you know, other than the fact that he looks way older than his picture, right? Because that picture had to have been taken when he was way younger, because he looked nothing like that picture. And I said, so as we're sitting there talking, I was like, so, you know, your picture, like your Top Gun picture, because I would tell him that. He looked like he was Top Gun, right? I said, your Top Gun picture. And then he goes, yeah. He goes, you like that? I said, oh, yeah. I said, so where was that taken? When was that taken? And he's like, oh, it was just a couple of years ago. He's like, but you know, he goes, I've been on a lot of first dates. He goes, and I'm thinking to myself, I am seeing why. And so he says, well, he goes, you are the first one that looks exactly like your picture. And I was like, really? Are you serious? And he's like, yeah. And then I said, I thought that's the way it's supposed to go. And then he's like, oh no. He goes, I've had women who have like a picture from their early 20s, and they show up and they are not looking like that anymore, and they gained so much weight. And he starts talking about women and their weight. And so I'm like, okay. And I'm thinner, of course, than, you know, well, you know, everybody's thinner when they're younger, you know. And so, but I still look relatively the same. I look back on those pictures, and I'm like, I look younger, but I still look the same. Like, physically, I'm still the same. And so I was like, oh, okay, you know. So we start to chit-chatting and stuff like that, and I'm just sitting there listening to him, because he's monopolizing the whole conversation the whole time. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not feeling this at all. This guy is just complaining. He's talking about his sister-in-law, and I'm like, it sounds like he wants to get with the sister-in-law. And so I'm like, yeah, no. And so at the end of the date, right, we were leaving. He's like, well, can I have a hug? And I'm like, no, you cannot have a hug. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And so I give him the church hug, and I book it, right? And I was like, well, it's nice meeting you. I'll see you later, you know. And so after that, I didn't even give him a chance to say anything else. Hey, let's go out again. Let's do this. Let's do that. You know, I just blocked him, because I was like, I was not feeling that date at all. And I'm like, you didn't even tell me that we were going to go Dutch on this date. If he would have told me we were going to go Dutch, that would have been fine, you know. And then the fact that he did a lot of complaining. He talked about like the sister-in-law and stuff like that, and women in weight. I'm like, no, this is not the guy for me, because I can't stand when people like want to sit there and criticize people on how they look, and yet you lied with your picture. So yeah, no. Yeah, no. Then the other guy was he was very cowboyish, right? Looking like George Strait. Oh my goodness, so handsome, so handsome. And he was older, right? And so I was like, okay, I it's fine, whatever. And twice married, twice divorced, and I'm like, okay, again, I can't judge, right? Because I'm divorced too. So we go to this really nice restaurant, and it's on the lake, right? And I'm thinking, okay, cool, nice. I'm going in there, and I've got a really pretty dress on, new pretty blue dress, with my cowboy boots, my corral cowboy boots, and I'm like, yeah, I look really nice. I like this was a really nice date, and this guy was really nice to me, and he was really sweet, and I'm like, and I couldn't wait for this date because just the way that he was and his energy and everything, and I'm like, this sounds like a really cool guy. And I was like, okay, cool. So again, I get to the restaurant and I don't see his vehicle. Like, he drove a pickup truck and I don't see it, and I'm like, where is this guy, right? So he comes out of the restaurant. He was waiting inside, right? Looking like George Strait, had the Wrangler jeans on and everything, button down shirt, perfectly dressed, cowboy boots and everything. And I was like, wow, it's like, he looks so nice. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait for this date. It's gonna be an awesome date. So we get inside and we're walking through the restaurant, and I see people checking us out and looking at us because, of course, it looks like a sugar daddy type situation, right? Because he's so much older and I'm younger, and I'm like, okay. I was like, we're gonna get those looks anyway. It's fine, totally May, December, right? So I'm like, okay, whatever, So we go and we sit down and we're outside, right? In the like the patio deck area, overlooking the lake, right? And so I'm like, wow, this is really nice. And so we were talking about all these things that we were going through and what was going on and stuff like that. And I had been doing like a walking challenge and stuff like that on Fitbit. And so we were going over that. And so we're talking, and all of a sudden the waitress shows up. And she's like, hi. This waitress, I don't know if she was just supremely attracted to him, or if she thought that like he was like really wealthy or something like that, like again, May, December, sugar daddy situation. I don't know if she thought that, if that was the case, So the whole time, like, we're trying to order or whatever, like she's fixated on him. She's flirting with him. And I'm like, okay, this is awkward because, like, come on, it's one thing to sit there and chit chat with a table, but it's another thing to just kind of like leave me out, like, hello. Yeah. And so as she's talking and she's fixated on my date, right? Of course, he's enjoying the show because it's like, it's these two young women and I'm trying to talk to him. And so he's talking and listening to me, and then she's trying to get his attention. So I'm like, this is just really weird. And so I told her, excuse me, I said, can I order Heineken? And she goes, oh yeah. And then, and he's like, yeah, just, he goes, I'll take one too. So she's like, okay, I'll be right back, And I'm like, and I look at my date like, really? And then he goes, oh, she's just friendly. I said, oh yeah, that's what it is. Sure. And so we're still sitting there talking, right? And so she comes back, and again, she starts in with my date. And so she's talking about all these things that she wants to do, and that she's in college and all this and all that. And I'm like, I said, I'm going to call her Amber. I said, Amber. And then she goes, yeah. And then I said, can I get a water back, please? And then she goes, oh yeah, sure. And so she takes off again, right? She's like, do you need anything, honey? And then he's like, no, I'm fine. So she takes off. And so she comes back with the water back, right? And so then she's talking to him again. And I'm like, I need some limes. And then she goes, you need limes? And I said, yeah. Nobody puts limes in their Heineken. Okay, that's number one, right? But I'm trying to get rid of her because, like, no, we're not doing this game, right? So she goes and leaves again, right? And so we get into this date, right? And all of a sudden, she doesn't come back with the limes, right? I think I got rid of her on that one because I kept sending her back, right? Because, like, dude, we're trying to have a date, Like, you see us trying to be out, And so then my date gets to talking. And all he talks about is the ex-wife. Oh, boy. And he just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks about the ex-wife. Not one ex-wife, but two ex-wives. And I'm like, I don't need to know your story. I was like, you look so handsome. And I'm thinking to myself in my head, I've got this going on in my head. This guy looks so handsome. And yet he seems like he's hung up on the ex-wives. And he had been divorced for quite some time. And I'm like, yeah, you don't do that when you're out on a date. You don't talk about the exes. On any of these disaster dates, I never talked about my ex-husband. So I'm like, yeah, no, that's not. We just never talked again after that. And then the final one, because I'm going to wrap this one up. I'm almost running out of time. The last one was the clear winner. He says, well, he's like, I really want to go to this restaurant. I can't even remember what restaurant it was, but it was a restaurant that was having a 2-for-1 deal, right? And he was like, you know, this place really has really good food. And then he goes, but let's order from this 2-for-1 menu, right? And he goes, but we're gonna go Dutch. He goes, if that's okay. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. You know, I'll go Dutch. It's cool. And then he's like, but let's order from this menu. And I was like, okay, it's the 2-for-1. And then he's like, yeah. He goes, it has a really good deal. He goes, it'll be cheaper for both of us. And I'm like, okay, you know, that's fine, whatever. It didn't matter, but I was like, okay, you know, whatever. And so we both ordered from the menu. And he says, we're gonna split this bill. He goes, but you can send it, you know, on one bill, but we'll just split it. And so the waitress was like, okay. And he goes, yeah, this way we don't have to split the tip, you know, it'll be all on there too. So I was like, okay, you know, that's fine. And so I'm thinking, okay, cool, you know, it'll be about like $12, $13, you know, for the meal, and then, you know, we'll just split the tip. Okay, cool. And so then the bill comes. The bill comes, and we had been chatting, and this guy is okay. He's not really like intelligently like in conversation and things like that. We don't have the same type of interests, but he's like more into video games and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, okay, you know. I was like, well, I said, but you know, the evening was pleasant enough. You know, that's at least no disaster had happened yet. So the bill comes, and then time to pay, right? So it's like, okay, so I have cash, so you know, we can do cash, right? I pull out my cash. He slaps a 2-for-1 coupon on the table. That was his contribution, was a 2-for-1 coupon. So he got his meal for free, and I had to pay for mine. Yeah. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay. So I closed it up, and I took it back to the waitress, and I said, here you go. And I left her a nice tip. And I said, see you later. He's like, well, wait, Blue, where you going? I said, see ya. So I took off. I left, right? Because I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, seriously? Like, I had to pay for my own. You insisted that we order from this menu. Like, seriously? So this is the disaster that I have been through in dating. And that's just some of my stories. But anyway, enough for today. So I will go ahead and wrap this one up. If you like this, if you have been through horrible dates too, I hope you hit that like button. I hope that you'll subscribe if you want to know more about me. And I will see y'all on the next episode.